Hey, everybody. I'm going to bring in Jared, Jen, and Daniel Kraus now for what is an incredible book, an incredible conversation with two bookworms and an amazing author, and all three brilliant. So I'm going to stop talking and let everybody else do their thing. Raise your hand if you'd like to be included for this. All right. Hey, guys.
What's up, Charlie?
We'll let y'all do your thing.
Okay, baby.
Hi. We are very, very excited. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining this conversation with Daniel Kraus about his thrilling new novel, Whalefall, right here, which I'm sure looks backwards on this. But Daniel is a New York Times bestselling author and Bram Stoker Award recipient, and he has authored The Shape of Water, Troll Hunters with Guillermo del Toro, as well as the critically acclaimed horror novel, The Living Dead. And our book today, Whalefall, is a heartfelt adventure thriller that is also, as we've come to find out, scientifically accurate. And we follow Jay, a young man searching for the remains of his deceased father in the depths of the ocean. And Jay finds himself in the belly of a massive sperm whale, only with 1 hour of oxygen left. And not only does Jay have to escape the belly of the whale before time runs out, but he also has to reconcile with his own demons to escape the labyrinth of his mind and his heart.
Yeah, we are so grateful for y'all for joining. And Daniel, I know we're looking at you across the computer screen, but we're so grateful to you.
Yeah.
We are both voracious readers, and this was a phenomenal journey that was thrilling and inspiring, and inspired questions within both of ourselves about life and trauma and generational trauma and the hero's journey and death and rebirth, every archetype that I love dearly. And I had never had quite the same experience going into the belly of the beast as I did reading your book. So thank you for the tireless work you undoubtedly did scientifically and just within yourself. And excited to talk to you.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you for the kind words about the book, and also just for, supporting books. And, it's great that people are voracious readers, but to be able to then sort of use the platform to get more people turned on to reading or specific books is really fantastic. So I appreciate that, regardless of whether you like my particular book.
Well, we sure did. Yeah. But no doubt. All right,
let's go. So I would like.
Are you ready? Let's make sure. We're ready.
I'm ready. All right.
Okay. All right.
So I thought we could start with the protagonist, Jay.
Mm-hmm.
He's grieving, and from the get-go, he's grieving the loss of his father, and he's dealing with a lot of guilt and resentment regarding him. I also want to bring up too the language in which he is first written and his voice, which is very I feel like you totally encapsulated that sort of teenage angst as well, just in terms of the way he draws metaphors and very rich in language and full. And I was just wondering, what was it like for you writing this particular point of view?
Well, I mean, for starters, I think, when you say he's grieving, that's partially true. But keep in mind, when his dad died, they were on terrible terms. Mm-hmm. So I think part of writing in that teenage point of view was hanging on to that edge of anger. If he's grieving, it's not in a way that's really evident to him. He's not allowed himself to feel sadness that his father is gone. His father was a huge pain in his neck, to say the least. Mm-hmm. So he's ostensibly doing the dive for his family, sort of out of a very self-centered sense of wanting to be forgiven by his family for not being there for the dad when the dad was dying for a full year.
And to the whole community that loved Mick Gardner, right?
Yeah, like everyone in Monterey where they live sort of revered his dad for being sort of a local diving legend. They had no idea that he was sort of this very problematic father figure. So he's sick of being looked down upon by the community. He's sick of his family being upset with him. So he's doing this dive in a lot of ways for himself, and not to cover up some sort of grief that he is not, I don't think, aware is even really there. He's in there in the water for a means to an end, to find the bones, or to at least say he tried to find a bone, so people will just kind of be nicer to him. You know,
You said something.
That's a teenage viewpoint. He just wants people to be nicer to him.
Right.
Yeah.
Sort of redeem himself.
You had a wonderful, I know I underlined it, I forget which page it was on, but you had something, you had kind of like, he wanted to prove that he wasn't the shit scraped off of Mick Gardner's shoe. That stuck with me. There were so many things that you said that stuck with me. And I want to get into that. And I love that you said it wasn't, you kind of said it wasn't grief. And in my head, I was hearing it was also a journey. It were like, and do they coexist? Are they mutually exclusive? Like, are you either grief stricken? But I love that we already talked about the teenage years, because I'm a 41-year-old man. I'm a husband. I'm a father. And I still feel like sometimes I want to prove another person. So is that a lifelong, starting with page 1 or page, sorry, I'm just nerding out. Page 3, I suppose, which is the first page of the novel. People aren't doors. They're whole floor plans, entire labyrinths. And the harder you try to escape, the more lost inside them you become. So I, in my copious notes in your book, I wrote along that side it was the beginning of a journey to sovereignty. And is that a journey that can be completed? Obviously, there are seminal moments in all of our lives, and seminal things we have to go through, important things we have to go through. Does that grief, does that teenage angst ever leave, or do you just start on a different trajectory?
Yeah, I don't think it ever leaves. I think to some extent, some of the angst you carry as a young person is helpful. Like, I don't think if you don't have that angst, it's difficult to be pushed forward to do certain things or to try to become your own person. You know, I think one of the most obvious but still sort of noteworthy metaphors in the book is the idea that someone else's life, your parents in this case, can swallow yours, just like Jay is swallowed by the whale. So, you know, Jay at the beginning of the book, he is not even Jay. He's Mitt's son, and that's all he'll be. And a lot of us can identify with that. For some of us, it's a parent. For some of us, it could be an older sibling. It could be a best friend, I guess. You know, it's someone who seems someone who seems to be you're stuck in their shadow. And I don't think that journey really ever ends, and I'm not sure it ever really should. I think some of the pain of that journey, ideally over time, will sort of be buffed off a little bit, so it's not as, so it's not as harmful or volatile on a day-by-day basis. But I still think, you know, being 41 or 48, I think is how old I am.
You can see your
you still want some of that. You still want some of that, a little bit of that anger. You still want to feel like you have something to prove. I think that there's an element of that is healthy and keeps us going and grasping, you know.
Yeah,
that's so fascinating, because we actually were talking about that yesterday, and I think it's interesting from our perspective as parents and as children of parents to be in this interesting place reading this book, because we are trying to prove points to our kids, relay information of like life, and it's like full circle understanding now where our parents were coming from and how that sort of propels us forward on our journeys. And still want to prove we did it right. We're, you know. Yeah,
you want, because funny enough, the next page, you talk about signposts through the labyrinth. And so I love what you just said. I'm grateful for it, that the journey kind of continues. And to some extent, you'll always be looking for some signposts through the labyrinth. Am I doing the right thing? Would he be proud? Would she be proud? Am I proud? So I love that from the get, I was aware that I was embarking on a journey. And, I had read the book cover and I was familiar with what it was going to be about. I had no idea how it was going to play out. And I was impressed and enthralled. I read it in 2 days and I finished it for the first time weeks ago. And so I have many memories, and we'll get to all of those. But I also love that early on, you're talking about, well, let me backtrack. Sorry.
Stop saying sorry.
Sorry.
I love
17 years old. Was that did that take a while to decide? Is he 12? Is he 18? Is he 25? Is he 17?
Well, I'll tell you, it's the answer is kind of surprising. It began with a physical reality that I had to deal with. Before you can even begin to plot a book like this, you have to have a pretty full grasp of what's possible inside of a whale. So typically when I'm writing a book, I would outline the plot I want. In this case, once I had the premise, I couldn't plot a thing because I don't know what the inside of a whale looks like. I don't know how to function. I don't know what one can do in there, what you can't do in there. Can you see? I don't know anything.
Yeah.
And one of the first things I found out is that only one kind of whale could ever swallow you, and that's a sperm whale. Most whales have throats that are like this, but a sperm whale has a large throat. And the first scientist I spoke to said it's going to have to be a really big whale, and it's going to have to be a pretty small person. So that at the very beginning, before I could even think of any kind of characterization, I knew that the person had to be kind of slender.
Sure.
So that made me think, well, maybe it's a kid, maybe it's a teenager. I don't think a little kid's going to be out scuba diving in waters like that. So drifting in my mind at that point was the idea that maybe this is a teenager. Now, to sort of close the deal on that, the premise was so powerful to me. Like it's such a primordially powerful idea that taps into something animalistic in our brain. Reminds us of when we were creatures that used to have to worry about being swallowed by things like that. That's our genetic past. So it's such a primal idea that I wanted to pair it with the most primal of relationships, which to me is parent-child. So between the stark reality of the physicality of going down a throat and wanting to have this parent-child relationship, it just seemed like the facts were just telling me that he should be a teenager.
Well, I mean, it fits perfectly, especially with the hero's journey and that self-discovery component. But I just want to quickly just touch upon the research. I know that you did extensive research on this. And I've read that one of the people that you reached out to is one of our favorite authors, Mary Roach.
Yes.
We love her books. They're amazing, especially Stiff, which is quite fascinating. But would you mind just talking a little bit about that process and what that?
Sure.
Yeah, what is that like for an author? Because she and I have largely been in the acting kind of medium, and so I certainly know what it's like to reach out to an actor and be like, "Hey, I have this fight scene, or I have this something, or there's a crime." Like, what do you do? So, what's that look like for an author?
Especially with creative control, and because you could have leaned into complete fiction, and you also really were accurate. And I know that the integrity of that was incredibly important because it's reflected throughout. So
in some sense, was that shackling yourself or freeing yourself? Because with your decision to remain scientifically accurate, it's either, a barricade you're not allowed to go past, or it's, all right, I'm living here in this world.
Okay, I'm going to try to.
Yeah, sorry, that was answer those 12 questions, please.
Yeah, I'm going to work backwards through the 7 or 8 questions there. It is shackling, I suppose, but I love that. The more limits I can put in place as a writer, the fewer things I allow myself to do, the more challenging it is, and the more creativity sort of pours from it. So from the very beginning, I was really excited about limiting myself to what was scientifically accurate. That forces every book I write, I try to create new problems for myself. I want, really, I want every book to sort of feel like I'm learning to write a book all over again. That way I don't ever go on autopilot. I can't ever just like rewrite ideas in books that I've already written. And so this one was like, well, I'm just going to have to become an expert in whales before I can even begin to write this. So the limitations are a positive thing. Now, remind me of one of the questions before that.
I guess just what was that like as far as
Mary Roach, research, yeah. Well, I do a lot of research for all my books. I really find that once I have this story idea, the research tends to affect the story and change the story because it usually is so interesting. In this case, I had to front load, of course, all the research because I didn't know thing one about whales. This is the opposite of write what you know. I don't know anything about whales. Didn't know anything about oceans. I didn't know anything about diving. This was all a creative challenge for me. Where Mary Roach came in was the morning after I had the idea. I wrote to her through email because we're friends, and she's a very valuable friend to have as a writer because she's spoken to everyone about everything. And yes, I always do call, because of her book Stiff, I often call on her for corpse related facts. But in this case, I was like, I asked her, did you ever, in all your interviews, have you ever run across someone who said you could be swallowed by a whale? And of course, she had written a book called Gulp, which in that moment I had forgotten, which is all about swallowing. So sure enough, she sent me to an expert. That expert kind of hooked me up with a couple other experts. And that was sort of the beginning of the education part of the process.
Well, if you can send me her email, I want to email her about Bonk. Okay. Just kidding. Amazing. Wow. I have a random question. Does Daniel Kraus have a Huey?
I don't think so. Huey's, that's an interesting question. Huey's an interesting character who, what's that?
Big time, so complicated, so fleshed out. I was just, to me, in my head, I would have assumed that was your uncle, your neighbor, your babysitter, whatever.
Because I don't think, Huey's a really critical character in the book, and I don't think anyone's ever asked me one question about him before.
No kidding. He's like Obi-Wan to me. Yeah,
he's standing in for a lot of important things, and I don't like to speak too much about the sort of secrets sort of embedded in the book, but he's a really critical character to what's going on. And he's difficult to speak about because of that. No, I don't think I have a character like Huey in my life, but everyone ought to. He's kind of he's the signpost. We're talking about signpost earlier. He's the guy who builds the signposts. He's the person there sort of gently nudging characters into, and he's sort of nudging characters into sort of collision points in a good way. So if you think about this, if you think about Whalefall, like the Book of Jonah, Huey is almost like the God force who's sending people, whether it's Mitt and Jay or Jonah and the whale, he's setting them off against each other to sort of collide and for some reconciliations to happen.
Yeah,
amazing.
Absolutely. He's such a sage.
Yeah, character. I wanted to meet him. If you had one, I was like, can I have his email as well?
So speaking of archetypes, because there are several that are integral throughout. I mean,
phenomenally fleshed out
from, the whale to Huey to Beaky, who, what a phenomenal character for the story, to help cause the swallowing and this journey, to help start the journey, I guess, not start it, but I guess one of the reasons
support along the way,
support, and then also help climb out. But are there any archetypes that you had put in that you omitted, or, you know, characters like that you had to
Weren't
revise?
necessary.
Yeah.
That's a good question, and often the answer to that is yes. In this case, everything had to be planned out so carefully beforehand, because I needed to know what was going on every minute of the hour of air that Jay had left. So there was really, when I began actually writing the book, there was really no more margin for error. So there's a limited number of characters. Obviously, I'm not gonna, another character, he's not gonna swallow a second person. So the only alternate characters that could be something of what you're talking about exist in the flashbacks. And it was definitely tempting at times to inflate one of the existing characters to have bigger roles. Like I could have made
His sister, his
the
mom.
mother, the sisters, he's got a couple friends. And I
Yeah.
think it's a natural, and I think my editor even, you know, would suggest these things at some points. But to me, it was just sort of like, let's keep my eye on the ball. This is a book about Jay and his father. I intentionally left the side characters as side characters. They are there to sort of serve the purpose of the main story. And I typically am a writer who is fairly dense. I don't mean that stupidly, but I mean like he writes dense books that are filled with characters and digressions and tangents. This I wanted to be like an arrow. You know, I wanted this to be fast and solid and sort of unimpeachable. And I really wanted to laser focus as I never had before.
I think you accomplished that. Do you feel like, again, as an author, that for those who have read the book, you'll understand. For those who haven't yet, read the book, and you'll understand soon. Do you feel like you not leaving yourself? Do you feel like because Jay didn't have a lot of room for error, you kind of put yourself in a position where you didn't have a lot of room for error? You had boundaries, you had the shackles we spoke of.
Yeah,
So,
I had no room for error. And in fact, this kind of ties into your previous question. There were not so much as characters, but there were things in the plot that I wanted to do that I couldn't. So sometimes I would bring up an idea to my whale experts, and I would say, "What about this?" Thinking in my head that this would be really cool to do, and they would just say, "No, impossible because of this or this or this." So I was really I always had to go by what was possible. And I can't speak in specifics because then we get into spoilers. There were always new ways to think of things. Once you get shoved into a corner by the facts of what you're having to deal with, again, you have to get more creative and think about, oh, how can I accomplish what I need to accomplish with the few items, sometimes literally in the stomach, with the few items that we have on hand.
Yeah.
Lots of effluvium.
Yeah, there you go. I'm a pretty happy guy. Sorry, this is a tangent. I'm a pretty happy guy. I'm not prone to jealousy. But it just occurred to me a second ago that I will never be able to say the words "my whale experts" in this lifetime. So consider me officially jealous. That's pretty well done.
It is nice to have them.
Yeah,
sure, I bet. I mean, there's so much of it tied into the story.
Speaking of whales, what prompted you to write about a whale? Why not? And I mean, I'm sure, you know, was it that you wanted your character from the get-go to be swallowed by something, or like what was the chicken and the egg?
In this case, it really was the premise that came first. So a couple of friends of mine had seen a viral video 3 years ago of a couple kayakers that end up in a whale mouth. And I'm sure a lot of people watching right now have seen it. It's for some reason a few months ago, it popped up again. It got popular again. So it's they were talking about this video. I hadn't seen it, and maybe because I hadn't seen it, I got thinking about it. That was the night I had the idea. And so for it to be a realistic thing, I mean, I could have done this in a fantasy world and made it a dragon or something like that. But that doesn't really appeal to me. I think what's so terrifying about some of these stories, whether it's this or 127 hours or sort of these survival tales, is how plausible they are. You know, like you could fall down a rock, a chasm in a hike and get your hand caught. You could, in theory, go diving or fall off a boat in something. And in theory, you could get swallowed by a whale. Like it's all possible. But once I sort of by necessity thought about there being a whale involved in the book, it wasn't like I was obsessed with whales my whole life, but I quickly became obsessed because I never wanted the whale in Whalefall to be like the shark in Jaws, which is sort of an antagonistic bad guy. Like the whale was always supposed to be not a figure of fear, but a figure of awe. Like the whale is very, it's very godlike. It's benevolent. It has nothing against Jay, wishes him no ill will. And so I got really wrapped up in the power and the almost like spiritual sense of being next to a being this unfathomably huge and sort of unfathomably intelligent too. Like, you know, even the whale experts are puzzled by elements of the sperm whale. They don't understand how exactly it works and how exactly it speaks and how it knows so much. So those were all elements that then I really, really got into. And I loved thinking of the whale as this, almost this emissary between worlds. Whales are mammals, so they have to dive, you know, like 7,000 feet down in the ocean to feed, but they have to come back up to breathe. And so I started having this visual of a whale being almost like an elevator between worlds, that would carry souls up and down from the sort of outer world where we live and some sort of more spiritual world. So I got really wrapped up in it, obviously.
Wow,
It goes back to what you said about how the whale is like a godlike figure. I don't remember exactly where in the book you said this, but you said something at a point in time where it was like a belief in God can be a handy wrench to carry, some of that effect. And so it's so the juxtaposition and the irony of what we know happens to Jay, and he's within this God creature, both physically and metaphysically and spiritually. And it is like, what is God? What is this definition of God here to teach him? What can he learn? And what would the wrath be on the flip side of that coin?
Yeah, it's well put, I think.
Yeah, no,
Father of the sea.
The old father of the sea. I also love something you said, and I think as thrilling as this book is and was, and I can't wait to go through it again. There was something you mentioned early on, and to help set the stage, not super early on, maybe 40, 50 pages into it. You talked about the past as undertow. And I found that so meaningful for not just myself, but maybe trying to figure out what other people are going through and how you're informed by your experiences. And that puts you on a certain path. And sometimes you have to go through death and rebirth or the hero's journey to course correct. And that's just something that stuck with me from the minute. I think it's somewhere in my copy of the book. It's underlined and notes in the margin and all that. But I think we'd all be well served to think of our past as an undertow.
Yeah, right. And Monastery Beach is known for its intense undertow. Like,
sure,
it's one of the most, sometimes known as the most dangerous beach in America.
Wow.
I've felt this undertow myself. You walk sort of along the surf line and it feels like it's grabbing your ankles. People die on this beach every year. A lot of, I mean, kids and dogs are especially vulnerable. They'll just walk along the edge. So it's, when you're writing about Monastery Beach, you're writing about undertows. And so that definitely brought in the idea of, you know, the whole reason he's going into the Monastery Beach waters is to sort
he
of,
has a deep undertow. He psychologically has a deep undertow.
Yeah, and maybe he's trying to kind of shove off that past that's keeping him that's trying to grip him.
He's got to beat it. He's got to conquer it.
Yeah. So that's sort of like what he's doing, but he's never processed it. Like he's trying to get rid of the undertow without really dealing with what it is that is going to kind of haunt him the rest of his life if he doesn't deal with it. You know, whether it's just this year during which his father was ill and he didn't visit him, or the sort of whole life preceding that. It's a lot. Yeah, it's a lot to deal with. Well, we all have that.
We do to varying degrees, right? So what a wonderful set and setting to have it at one of the most dangerous beaches in the US, because clearly his undertow was strong. Some of us have a much more pleasant or reasonable undertow, and I guess Jay had a lot to deal with and had to conquer it, and it's an amazing story.
You know what else I also really loved, while we're speaking about the visuals of all of that, was your style as well. Like, I loved the way you led up to being in the Whale style wise, like with the way you structured your sentences and in parentheses when there were conversations. I don't want to spoil it. And also after, when he's having to sort of come to a realization, which I can't even talk about because it makes me cry.
I know. We cried this morning talking about some parts.
I just loved, it makes you cry. I'm such a baby. But I loved those moments so much. And I loved how I'm such a weenie. I'm
sorry, Daniel. I'm sorry.
But style wise, I really it really affected me. I loved it so much, of the way that you did it, because not only did you create this beautiful visual of this story and what's happening, the smell, I mean, it was so visceral, but then on top of it, style wise on the page, it was really powerful too, because you kind of encapsulated it perfectly with parentheses, with a certain sentence or one-liner on a page. And it really allowed the reader to have a moment and take a step back as well. So just to kind of tie it all into a bow, that was pretty fucking phenomenal as well. So just gotta say that.
Well, no, I appreciate that. I mean, I don't often get asked about sort of the words on the page, but it's more themes and ideas and plot. But you know, that most of the time of writing a book is spent sort of putting the words one after the other. And with this book, I was particularly cognizant of how the words looked on the page. Like I was almost looking at the page itself like a piece of artwork. You're going to lose this a little bit if you read this on ebook. Everything's going to be the same, but you're going to lose sort of how the pages look. The way that the page turns from one chapter to another, the white space that are on certain pages where there's just a single sentence, that all creates a sort of a psychological effect. And being able to flip through a paper book a little bit and see how far, even if you're just glimpsing, see how far the PSI ratings keep going down. All these have an effect on the reader. And I want, I've often, if you read enough books, you can almost get to a sense where you can understand a lot about a writer by just sort of looking at a page and not even necessarily reading it, like just sort of looking at it. You can almost blur your eyes a little bit, and that you can sort of see the length of the words that are used and the different kinds of words that are used, and you get a sense about the author without really reading a single word. So all that was extremely important to me. The parentheses, like you're talking about, which I think it's fair to talk about. Is it okay if I talk about it?
You're the boss here. We don't want to give anything away that we're not supposed to.
Beginning of it comes into play just the beginning of the second half of the book. So I think it's okay. It's when the whale, at least in Jay's perspective, and he's of course injured and panicked and under the effect of methane and maybe hallucinating, but the whale starts to talk to him, and instead of putting the whale's words into quotation marks, I put it in parentheses. And the idea here was not just to set it apart from regular spoken words, but that the parentheses looked like ripples in water.
Wow.
Oh, I wasn't
It's
sure if
just-
it was that or if it was the deeper, like it almost felt like
Like a feeling, like a message from God.
like, well, also a reverberation,
Yes.
but
You know,
deeper.
that's it, Jen. That's exactly right.
Okay.
Ripples in water and a reverberation. They're really the same thing. It's just these. So when the whale gets louder, I add more parentheses, and I just liked how that looked. Like it just looked good on the page and looked strange and again sort of unfathomable, like the whale's unfathomable. I just never seen anything quite like it. So I'm always on the lookout for just graphical things on a page.
But it also really felt like it encapsulated where he was in the whale as well. Like he's so stuck and trapped in to the point where you mentioned, you know, you can't even get out with a diving knife. Like he is so in it that to get out of these reverberations as well, or the, you know, all of the structures of the whale. So it kind of fit into that as well, the confines of it.
Yeah,
So
because you're not really hearing as much as you are feeling the reverberations. You know, like he's got this gigantic heart behind him and these two massive lungs, and so he can hear, but he's more like feeling it in his solar plexus. You know, like these are the waves that he's really feeling.
I've never heard an author say that or read about an author saying something like that, but it's so true. And I am guilty of reading some things on devices here and there when we're traveling or whatever, and there are 4 books you want to read. You don't want to carry on
Nothing wrong with that.
This was, you know, I read the hard copy.
and it's great to listen to as well, which also sort of takes away.
Sure. There is something that was very visceral about, I'm not going to get into details, but about going through memories and having to see the empty space on the page and what was written and what stood out about a certain memory, and then to make the physical effort to turn the page and see the next, you know, you know what we're talking about, what I'm talking about, knows, and the audience who's read so far knows as well. But yeah, it was a certain, I found myself like, am I turning this page now? It felt very, gosh, there's something that I think Huey talked to Jay about going through a physical motion that it almost brought up the memory, or maybe it was going to Mortuary Beach,
Monastery,
what they call mortuary as well. But there was something about the physical action and seeing something and having that feeling like something's missing, or this isn't the whole story.
Right. But
or this is enough. This is plenty.
Just for anyone out there who read it on ebook, you're fine. You've got 98%.
Oh my gosh.
This is sort of bonus kind of stuff you get from manipulating the paper, but you know, you're fine.
Do you have any final questions before we move on to the audience question?
I have one more.
I have one statement, but you do your question and I'll do my statement.
Are you sure?
Sure.
Okay. I always love, like, you were truly one of my favorite authors. This is a book that I will come back to over and over again.
Read to their kids.
Yeah, read to our children, and it's just one of those. Like I love the hero's journey, and particularly this one where I feel like, as crazy as it sounds to relate to a person being swallowed by a whale, I really could relate to the story, and it just really hit hard. And I love your stories. I love your taste. I love your writing. I would love to know who you love and what books, or if there's something you're reading now, or if there are books that you love to read over and over again.
I have answers for you. I don't tend to read things over and over again. There are very few books in my life that I return to. I do have them, but
Cannery Row?
What's that?
Cannery Row?
No, actually, I never read Cannery Row until, and I like Steinbeck a lot, but I never read it until Monterey was going to be part of the book. And if you're in Monterey, Cannery Row is just everywhere. So I knew I had to read that and incorporate it in some way. But I don't return to a lot of things. I'm so voraciously after new material and disparate material that I'm kind of all over the place. There's so many writers I like. Someone who I like to mention, just because she's not as well known as she should be, is a writer named Maurice Meyer. It's Meijer, I think is her last name. I love everything she does. She works in this space that I kind of do too, whereas she takes things that are terrible and awful and ugly and makes them sort of beautiful, which is what I've always tried to do with my writing. Is I try to write gorgeously about horrific things. And I have my reasons. So she's somebody I really like. A book that I have returned to a couple times, possibly my favorite book, is called The Cipher by Kathy Koja. These books sort of border on horror novels, but aren't. But in the same way that Whalefall is a horror novel, like it sort of is, but there's a lot happening outside that genre or the emotions you'd associate with it. I mean, I could go on and on. We better get to your statement.
Yeah. Amazing.
Get to your statement.
I will. And I'm going to buy their books ASAP. We have some travel coming up, so I can't wait to get into them. I wanted to say something, and to you, but also to our audience who's watching now and who will watch in the future. Having finished Whalefall a couple of weeks ago, all that is encapsulated in it, I feel like a better father 2 weeks later, and that is maybe a bit unique or esoteric in that not everybody is a father, but universally, I feel like a better child, like getting a different view of how people are complicated, and your parents can be complicated. My parents are complicated. I love them dearly. I am complicated. My wife is complicated. We love our children dearly. So it's helped me think about communication and what my child might be hearing that I'm not saying, and what I might have heard that wasn't said to me. So thank you and bravo. And let's go ahead and hear. Yes, sir.
Oh, I was just going to say I think we all go into this book thinking we're Jay, but we come out the other end realizing we're Mitt as well. So that's well said.
Yep. Thank you. All right.
Yeah. Wow. I don't know how to top that, but we're going to talk to the audience right now real quick. We've got a few questions here in the Q&A. In fact, I'm going to grab, I see Jamie Pose here in the audience has sent in a couple of questions. So why don't we just bring her in to the video here real quick, because her questions are actually really relevant here. So I'm just going to bring her in real quick. Jamie, hello.
Hi.
Hey, Jamie.
So I did ask a couple. I was enthralled by this book.
Oh yeah. Thank you for joining. It's such a great book.
Thank you very much. I'm honored. I was very, very excited to get to speak with you, Daniel, and talk about the book. But one question I did have that I've been thinking about for a long time was do you think some of the guilt attributed to Mitt's suicide has anything to do with the possibility that he now exposed his son to potentially getting mesothelioma, and like his risks are higher? Do you think there was any guilt there after he found out his cause? Yeah,
that's an amazing question. I think it's very possible. Like that's getting sort of in the weeds of the book, which I love. That's what was killing Mitt when he took his own life. And who knows if Jay had gone to see his father, what his father might have said, which might have included the most impossible thing that you would have ever think from him: stop diving, because these waters are in that area, they can be dangerous. You can get this sort of cancer. So I think it's possible. But on the other hand, I don't know that if Jay, this book is not about simple answers, and I don't know if Jay were to have gone to see his father, if it would have changed much. Like it's impossible to say. What's important is not that he went there and one or the other of them said something that changed everything. What's important is that Jay, when he's in the belly of the whale, comes to the realization that all those lessons his father tried to teach him, that Jay wasn't interested in, and they weren't taught very well, and blah, blah, blah. Those were instances of Mitt trying to show his love, clumsily, poorly, but those lessons were his love. And he just has to sort of now in retrospect, understand that and appreciate it as much as he can.
Thank you, Jamie. Awesome question.
Yeah, that was a great question.
That's a great question. From Joanne, recently I've avoided books on death and dying, but this book helped, so thank you. How do you see Jay moving forward and having that understanding now that he has? Like, what do you see for his future if he were to add a little bit there from Joanne?
It's a tough one because you know, I generally don't think about that kind of thing. I cut off the end of the book, and that's, you know, what's interesting about books is that you're presenting half the story, and the readers are creating the other half. I think in something like TV or film, the equation is not quite that. You're supplying a lot more, and then the watchers are bringing to it some. But in books, I feel like it's like 50-50. Two people are not going to visualize a book the same way. So my job is sort of to hand it over to you to sort of figure out what happens next. I could sit here and speculate on it, but it would really be the first time I was ever doing so. I think he's got a tough road ahead of him. You know, his body is
Different.
Yeah, I'm also wondering if we're treading into spoiler territory.
You know, in these future meetings, we may need a 5-minute spoiler only section of this. So like, we need something where we can talk about it and say, spoilers, cover your ears.
He's gone through a lot,
He's just been through
physically and mentally.
Oh.
I think is enough to say. Yeah.
Yep. So, but again, I think I should probably stop there, because anything I would come up with now would really be just sort of on the fly, postulating. I think I'm handing it off to you to sort of.
I love that. I think the question was not for me, obviously, but I love that. I almost, I heard a famous story about David Mamet wrote a play. He's written many, but he went to one of the rehearsals and got kicked out by the director. He's like, your job here is done. Now it's for the audience. So same with songs, you know, like Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven is about Lord of the Rings, apparently, but not to me, you know.
No, that's exactly right.
You know, so it's about somebody sees a painting and it makes them cry with joy, and someone else sees it and goes, oh, that's garbage. Like, where do you think it goes? I think is a really cool thing to hear an author, phenomenal author say, a creator.
Yeah, once you release art, it's not yours anymore.
Yeah.
Like
That's amazing.
That's the risk of it. I mean, that's the risk and reward of it, is that people are going to find things in it that you never put there that flatter you. And some people are going to take the wrong messages from it and horrify you. But that's the risk of making art.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Amazing. So
What is it? What you said in the book? Principles are a good excuse for being an asshole.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I guess beliefs can be the same, right?
Yeah.
Either you're an asshole about it, or you take with it and make something better. Sorry, I didn't mean to try and step in on that.
Oh, amazing. Well, we're going to move on to our meet and greet now. So we just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Definitely go out and get Daniel's book. Do you guys have any last questions, Jen and Jared, for Daniel, or anything you want to say right here at the end here?
I think I said what I really was hoping to say when I finished it a couple weeks ago. I mean, do I have any more questions? I could talk to you for 10 hours and keep on going. I just want to say thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for putting this out there into the world. I cannot wait to share it with my children and with my grandkids, hopefully someday. And I again, just to touch on what I'd kind of said earlier, I feel like this book is going to help my kids forgive my mistakes, which is more than I can ask from anything. So thank you.
And Daniel, can you just tell us anything you got coming up? We want to support you, support authors. Jen and Jared are big supporters of writing and authors. So
I've got, just yesterday I had a book come out called Scream for the Camera, which is a middle grade book for part of this series called Graveyard Girls. So that's kind of a fun, much lighter, kind of spooky series that I write with an author named Lacey Harrison. So I'll leave it at that. I've got a ton of stuff coming up, but in due time.
beautiful.
Great.